Om Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Punattu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu Mavit Vishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So, just as a recap and a reminder, and just a little bit of an introduction to where we're up to in chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita has 18 chapters, and we're on the 7th one, so we're just a third of the way through the knowledge. And it's designed for a thinker to live their life to get to the truth. Everything we do on this planet is in pursuit of truth, our peace of mind, our fulfillment, our satisfaction, so that we feel actually paripurna, there's nothing left to do. So the actual knowledge is offering that. But unfortunately, in our everyday, there's like a battle going on in our heads. Our mind's desires covered everything and distract us from that truth. So there is something in us called buddhi, intellect, which enables us to direct our mind's desires. So we do fulfill our desires in our worldly pursuits. But there's a technique on how you can do that. So you gain that peace of mind. Throw away that worry and anxiety that people generally have in their day-to-day. So the Bhagavad Gita is a conversation between the teacher and taught. There's a backdrop of history of the Bhagavad Gita. There's a conflict between two sets of cousins in a kingdom. It's not a new type of narrative. Wherever you go in the world, there's this story, a perennial story of good and bad conflict. And normally what happens is initially the bad is far greater in numbers, your thoughts and your desires, which are negative. So they overpower you. The good is generally fewer in numbers in your thoughts and desires. That's symbolic in the Bhagavad Gita of the two cousins of the royal family, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. The Pandavas are 5 in number. They're the goodies. And the Kauravas are hundreds. They're the baddies, representative of our thoughts. So the idea is, how do we overcome the negative tendencies in us and raise above that? And the Bhagavad Gita is talking about that. So the scene is set on a battlefield. The battlefield's not a real fisticuff fight. It's the battle which goes on within your inner personality every day in the way that you relate to your world. The Bhagavad Gita gives you that knowledge. Its origins are Vedanta, which means as philosophy, Veda, knowledge, Anta, end, the terminus of a culmination of wisdom. The word philosophy too means philo, one who loves. Sophie, truth. There's no difference across the board of the whole world when you're talking about universal principles of life and living. It doesn't matter where you come from, what religion you are, what caste you are, what profession you are. Truth is truth, and it's universally the same. Its definition, in actual fact, is what is the same in the past, present, and future for all of humanity, for all creatures on the universe. So as a human being, you have an opportunity to pursue this truth, and you have an opportunity to direct yourself, because unlike any other creature, you have a capacity of intellect. And at this moment in time, this intellect is relatively dormant, this buddhi. So we have to, as human beings, in our pursuit, and what the Bhagavad Gita or any text as such will be educating you on, is that capacity of intellect. How do you develop your intellect? So it leads you in the direction of truth. All of them are saying the same. It doesn't matter where you go. The Bhagavad Gita happens to be thousands and thousands of years old. It's quite a reliable source in that sense. It gives you the opportunity, and anywhere you go, it should give you these opportunities if you're looking at truth, where you have the ability to ask questions, reason and think, make your decisions on informed facts, reason and logic. So that's why we look at something like this. So we're on chapter 7 now. The first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita was the psychology of what happens to an individual. It's just talking about the psychology of stress. What happens to us in life? And the second chapter then gives you the highest knowledge of how you can get out of this stress and get to that truth. So it's a conversation between teacher and taught, Arjuna and Krishna on the battlefield. Krishna symbolic of the truth. Arjuna is that student who's actually taken him incidentally on the battlefield when the narrative is played out as a manifestation. Remember, it's really in your head, but it's played out on a battlefield, and Krishna is the charioteer, representative of the truth. Arjuna is the student who is actually in seeking that truth on the battlefield, where he has to fight. He's a warrior prince. So the second chapter gives the highest of knowledge, but he's not quite ready because he's full of confusion and stress. And up till the first and the second chapter of the 11th verse, he's just babbling on about his stress. Krishna gives the sermon of the highest knowledge of what a realized person is, sthita prajna. Then he goes on realizing that this fellow can't take in that knowledge. It's gone over his head, but he blasts him with the knowledge to dazzle him, to say, this is what is available to you. He then goes on to the more practical chapter of karma yoga, the yoga of action, how you play out right action in your life. What have you got to do? What are the constituents? What gives you that momentum? It follows it in chapter 4 by how do you serve yajna in a cooperative? What are the constituents? At what level? Material, physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, being the highest service. And then in chapter 5, it talks about the spiritual aspirant of being a yogi, jnani, sannyasi. What are those definitions? I'm running through them just to give you a brief summary to take you to chapter. All of you know this, I believe. We're just introducing. So chapter 6 talks about the yoga of meditation, the final stage of your spiritual pursuit. There's no point doing meditation unless you've prepared yourself through karma, action, bhakti, that devotion to something higher, a recognition of an identification of your universe is one and the same as you, a gratitude. Then jnanam, that knowledge which backs your actions and your devotion. And then you're in a set state when you have very few desires to get into meditation. Though the craze today of meditation is generally, let's get into meditation. That's the spiritual path. It doesn't talk about that in the yoga of meditation in chapter 6 at all, only slightly. And now today, we are a few verses in to chapter 7. the yoga of knowledge and wisdom, jnanam and vijnanam. And what you have to understand, so we just got up to verse 3 and we'll cover the next few verses today. What you've got to understand, all the knowledge in the world, you could be a PhD, you could have a doctorate, you could be a researcher, you could be doing space programs, etc. You could be researching a new formula for DNA or what have you. All those are objective knowledges. They're not subjective spiritual knowledges, though you might use that from within you to promote the world. It's great to have a beautiful world which is harnessed and with all the conveniences which help you to live practically. But having all the press button comforts doesn't necessarily make you peaceful. So that relationship, the rishis, the sages, the saints recognized there needed to be a paradigm shift. There needed to be an emphasis. And right now, current day society is definitely needed, where we grow our intellect. There needs to be where people relate to themselves within so that they can relate to their world in the optimum. Just developing the world isn't enough. So knowledge, subjective knowledge, is what we're talking about in this chapter, not objective knowledge. So objective knowledge helps you gain an entry point. It's great to do that. So here when he's talking about knowledge, he's talking about knowledge, jnanam, knowledge of the self, the truth. That which is to be known is the knowledge of the self. And when you have gained that knowledge of the self, you gain vijnanam. So in the first chapter, first verse of this chapter, it's the second verse, in fact, Krishna declares that he will give knowledge and wisdom to Arjuna if he hears him out. It's actually impossible for anybody to give you wisdom. But the reason he says that is the method in which this knowledge is given out. You get an inbuilt reflection if you pursue it in truth. And that transforms into your own wisdom. So you have to put in the effort yourself. As some share, without a doubt, you get it, he says. So here and now, your reason for existing is only to get to truth. It's not all the peripheries. You may pursue a vocation of whatever it is that your nature is, but at the backdrop, it's only to get to truth. That self, that Atman, that Brahman, call it what you want. It's only to get to that. Paripurna, enlightenment, moksha, nirvana. There's so many words. So wisdom digested, knowledge digested is wisdom. And it requires reflection. So any of you that are picking up morning study or study at all of this, if this is the only time you study, it's very, very little. It's like the punctuation at the end of a sentence in a novel when you have a class like this. So don't think this is it. You've got to go away and do your homework. Every morning, take in a little bit of knowledge. Shravana, we call it, just taking in something. Hear it or read it from a teacher or from a scripture or something higher which inspires you. It starts wherever. And in that 20% of knowledge that you're taking in, 80% of the time is reflection, manana. That's the proportion that we recommend. because nobody can give you the wisdom. And there's no point shoving in lots and lots of knowledge. What happens if you take in knowledge and knowledge and knowledge and don't do anything about it? Does anybody know? Anyone? Vidya, who's had your hand?
You just become an academic, or worse still, you get too confused and you can even lose the plot. You can
There's a plot.
become mad.
Okay. So you become an academic, you could lose the plot. Oh, Babita, you had something? I think you're on mute. I think you're on mute, Babita. I think it must be something not okay. It's on mute. Go ahead.
Okay. So no, I was going to say the same thing, that if you just accumulate knowledge, first of all, what good is to have that knowledge if you cannot use it anywhere? So it's just a waste. And again, if you, yeah, it will confuse you. You know, you overwhelming with the facts, but there's no good to you or to anyone.
Good. Is there anybody else to add? Cramming yourself with knowledge. What happens? Ash.
I'm just thinking that if you accumulate knowledge and continue to do that, your ego will just grow more so, because you're not applying anything and you're not actually reducing it.
Mm-hmm. So your ego can grow. Intellectual centipede. Got a lot of knowledge. Not going anywhere. What else? What if I go into a gym and I pick up, I've never been in a gym, and I pick up 15 kilos of weight either hand? What can happen to me?
You may harm yourself.
You may harm yourself. Exactly. But what if I take a little bit, maybe 1 kilo? You get out, go like that. A few weeks later, another one. Slowly, drip, drip. Enabling my body to adjust, yes. Maybe 15 kilos is not so much after a while. But there's something going on in between of it. The digestion. The capacity increase. But when you are overloading, anybody else before? Jnana and Vijnana. So when you Renu.
Well, you could sort of feel oversaturated, and then if you're overloaded, you could just feel like, oh, this is beyond me, and give up.
Yeah, that can happen. So different things can happen. So you could be overloaded, you give up. You could be overloaded, you become an intellectual centipede. You throw out that knowledge, you don't actually live it. You tell everybody else what to do as well. It can be quite damaging to have a lot of knowledge. Heavy, it becomes heavy. So you become verbal diarrhea, speaking out to everybody because it's heavy. You've got to digest it somewhere. Make it that wisdom. So it becomes contrary to truth. is collecting, hoarding knowledge. So nobody can give you wisdom. And wisdom is when you digest that knowledge through your own reflection, you draw it out of yourself, and then you're able to live it. So in the second verse, he's saying, Nadad, I'll give you this. Samshaya, I'll give you wisdom. Because the method of the scripture is such that it gives a sort of, if you're consistent in it, only if you're consistent in it, it gives a sort of reflection, because the same concepts are coming up every so often. And slowly, slowly, the penny drops, but you've got to be consistent. Have a consistency of purpose of where you're heading, what you're doing. And slowly, slowly, you become more introverted. Introverted doesn't mean to say you don't relate to the world. Or, I don't, I hear some people, I'm an introvert, I don't like people. It's ridiculous. It actually means you've got a better relationship with the world in where you need to. You have a concentration of something subtler from within. And you're able to be in people's company or with yourself. It doesn't make any difference, the physical context. But in your mind, you've got something higher going on. Introvert. So you slowly maybe withdraw from the preoccupations of the nonsense of the world, but you have a different vision, a bigger perspective of how to relate to your world. And slowly, slowly, that digested knowledge becomes uparati. We've done this before, I think, in the text, where you digest it and you gain a dispassionate passion, meaning you're more objective to your world in the way you relate. And slowly that brings you to that stage of meditation when few desires are there. You've refined your thoughts. You see the bigger picture. When you relate, it has an impact in the world, if so be. But it's from clarity of intellect, of a focus on a higher ideal. Then you transition finally to the self. So it's a process, a very logical and systematic process. So in verse 3, just going to it, he's saying, it's scarce. It's very, in all the billions and billions and billions of creatures, bacteria, it's very scarce, and the possibility you've become a human being, it's quite a grand thing. It's sacred. And you're being the human being to achieve that highest state. So to have put in all that previous effort, then come to the stage of a human being, then be so preoccupied with the world, which just gives you that worry, anxiety, stress, if you don't know how to relate. It's not that you shouldn't relate to the world. Yes, one ought to fulfill one's desires, but there's the method in which one does it. So at the backdrop, it's so sacred that you've got this ability, we have it, to get to the truth, our existence being that mission to just do that. But we don't consider getting onto that pursuit because of our preoccupation of what XYZ is doing, and we should be doing the same, keeping ourselves in stress. It doesn't make sense. He's saying, you've got to that stage. So in the third verse, it could be misconstrued as that he says, among thousands of men, scarce one strives for perfection. And those who strive and succeed, scarce one knows me in essence. So even when you're on the spiritual path, it sometimes seems very difficult and far away that you may never get to that truth. All the efforts you're putting in, but you got to keep going. It's actually not a negative verse. It's actually very optimistic, saying it's feasible to get there. You just have to keep putting in the effort, taking a little bit of jnana, knowledge, a bit of reflection, vijnana, slowly digest it, move to the next step, keep going, never give up. You get there. Samshaya, I give you wisdom, he's saying. So I think let's just chant the verse and then we read the commentary. Is there any question before we go ahead? Let's chant 3.
Manusyanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye yatatam siddhanam kaschin mam vetti tattvataha.
Guru, if you could read the verse.
Yeah. Give me a second.
Mhm.
Among thousands of men, scarce one strives for perfection. Of those who strive and succeed, scarce one knows me in essence.
So in the Kena Upanishad, he mentions Ihacheta Vedi Upahismaste Nahacheta Vedi Mahachet Vinashti. If you don't get it here, it's a loss, great loss. Maha Vinashti, a supreme great loss. So you've got an opportunity here to get to the truth, being a human being. You've got to get it. So, got to get out of your playthings, as it says in the Bhagavad. Balastavat krida sakta tarunastavat tarune. But he says, when you're young, you're playing with playthings. When you're an adult, when you're a teenager, you're playing with teenage passions. When you're old, you've got all the stress and worry. Why don't they play with that? When are you going to have time for Govindam, the truth? Whole life goes with that preoccupation of the world. So you're a human being. Don't let go of that pursuit. Does anybody remember that story of the boulder and the sadhu? I told it so many times, I don't know what you listened to. Do you remember? The man who goes early in the morning, pushes the boulder up the hill. When he gets to the top of the hill, it's so high up. And then he just throws the boulder down and laughs. And everybody in the village thinks he's mad. And one charitable person leaves him food at the bottom, so when he comes down, he can eat the food. And everybody thinks he's mad, but they understand that's what he does every day. And then sometime later, after he's been doing it for a while, just going pushing slowly to the top, the boulder, then throws it down and laughs. They all think he's gone cracked. Then 2 sages come from the mountains, the Himalayas down, looking for this man, giving a description, and one person in the village goes, I know who you mean, it's that cracked person. He's there. You can go and find him there. And when they see him, they prostrate to him. Where have you been? Why did you leave us? They're so pleased to see him. And then the village person says, what on earth are you doing? Why are you prostrating to him? He's a cracked fellow. And then one of the sages explained. What was it that they explained? Does anybody remember? I have told this story many a time. What was the moral? Does anybody remember? Babita.
I can give it a go.
Yeah.
It's just the things we accumulate all our life, and when the end comes, everything just goes. We have never utilized it. It just goes to waste. So that's why it symbolizes that we are accumulating things, struggling to go high and high and high, and then in the end it just goes finished. Never made use of it
You can't take anything when you die, remember that.
with us.
Anybody else wants to add? Who knows the story? Good.
Well, I know you've told this a number of times, but I think so. I always think of it as different. When you're telling me, I always think that it's, as Babita said, you're climbing up the hill and going through life and accumulating all these things, and it's the striving to get there, and that's the difficult bit. But then when we get there, we have to let go. So I always think of it that he's saying, just let go of it all, which Babita says. But to me, it's also saying that the striving to get up that hill is part, not enjoyment, but that's what's more worthwhile. But I know that that is not the moral, because you've told me before and I can't remember it. But that's always what I think of it in my head. Sorry.
That's fine. You took that away. That's good. Good. Anybody else? We're moving towards it. Tim.
Stories are important to each of us, and we hold on to them because they mean something to us. Like, we've had several interpretations. And I'm curious, you've told this story many times, Pauji. Why is it so important to you, this story?
Doesn't matter why it's important to me. The moral matters. Perhaps I tell it because the moral is important.
That's what I meant. What is the
Why is it? So you want to know the moral? You want me to tell you? Good. Okay. So you need to remember all of what everybody has said, because that has a value in it. So we strive to, we've gone through so much to strive to be human. Now we're human. We've got the capacity to strive to get to the truth. The self, the Atman. We put in all of the efforts through our lives, we go along our lives. We may pursue this path, but when we get preoccupied in the world, so it's like we get to the top, we've got to that status of human being. So we put in all the effort only to get involved in the preoccupation of the world. And we just throw it away. Our ability to actually pursue the self, we throw it away. So it's the sage, the man going up the hill and laughing is almost like a joke. We've got so much ability and potential, but we throw it away. It's ridiculous. We just throw away the potential to get to the truth. So he's laughing. It's easy. To strive takes effort up that hill. Once we've got to the status, we get involved before taking it further, and we just throw the capacity away, and it's gone in a minute. That capacity, if you don't keep your focus on the higher, it's gone. Because we're all too busy following the herd, not thinking independently about the bigger values of truth. It's not to be pessimistic, it's actually optimistic to say that we have this potential. Don't throw it away. Chap's laughing when you throw down the boulder, when he throws down the boulder. He gets it. We've strived all this time to get to a human being. We put in efforts, yet if we don't get to the self, we've thrown our potential away. When you've got the potential and possibility in this lifetime. So it says, scarce one strives for perfection. Of those who strive and succeed, so you get onto this path, you're doing well for yourself. Scarce one knows me in essence. So even on the spiritual path, we throw it away. You've got to keep consistent to get to it. Don't just think you're a big human being. Get involved in the world again. Keep at the backdrop of every action, perception, emotion, and thought. But there's a purpose for all of it to get to truth. I'm here on this planet and existing to get to the truth. So all my activities need to be directed as such, in accordance to my Swadharmic nature, whatever I need to do. There's no taboo in getting into what you need to do, but keep at the back of the mind the purpose. Let's read the commentary.
Yeah. This verse further encourages spiritual seekers to strive for perfection. A human being stands out as the chef d'oeuvre of creation, a masterpiece among all creatures. Providence has indeed blessed humanity with infinite potentiality. Nevertheless, among humans, hardly anyone strives for self-development. And even among the strivers for perfection, scarcely one pursues with determination to reach the ultimate state of self-realization. The cross-section of humanity totally lacks interest in self-development, much less in self-realization. People run after the enchantments of the world because they provide them instant pleasures. They do not wish to pursue the self because they lack the patience and perseverance to strive and struggle and wait indefinitely for its long-term benefits. All over the world, people look for immediate results with an eye on personal pleasure. Therefore, the one who strives for perfection belongs to that highly privileged class of people. And the one who strives harder still to realize the self becomes unique and the most outstanding. Seekers of truth should derive a great deal of satisfaction and encouragement from this verse, which puts them all on a high pedestal.
Mm-hmm. So in order not to fall off your pedestal, you got to have an objective perspective, meaning you're able to see the world in a different way. The minute you take in knowledge, your perspective becomes different, becomes bigger and bigger, more universal. So to throw that away when you're on a pedestal, be careful. You've got a bit of height. You've got to keep putting in the efforts there. That's the grandeur of it. Got to keep putting in the effort. And the more you, even as you begin to turn inward, you get that satisfaction. You get the joy of it. You get the pleasure of it. But it's a different in kind than that when you contact your world. There's a different satisfaction. But don't get stuck with it. Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. So your projection of your world becomes one and the same as you. Keep moving, keep moving. 4. Let's chant 4.
Bhumi apa anal vayuhu tam mano buddhireva cha ahankara itiyam me vinna prakriti ashtadaha.
So, Ash, if you could read the verse.
Earth, water, fire, air, space, mind, intellect, and also ego. Such is the eightfold division of my Prakriti, nature.
So the subtlest and grossest parts of the eightfold division of Prakriti, matter, is putting forward here, and putting forward as that's part of the nature of the Brahman. So apara and para, there's the two words. The lower is apara, para is the higher natures of the Brahman. So here is mentioning air, water, fire, space, mind, intellect, and ego. So the grosser aspects, the aspects which we see manifested in the world, are these five elements. And the subtler aspect of the matter is your mind, intellect, and ego. So it's the grosser and subtler aspects of matter he's just mentioning here. The mind, as we know, with emotions, the intellect has your thoughts, makes decisions, and the ego is what connects the mind and intellect, and it's saying it's mine. So my thoughts and emotions are different than your thoughts and emotions, mine, as it were. So you arrogate it to yourself, not self as in bigger. So the 8 parts of the gross and subtle elements, that division makes up that whole matter, Prakriti, that manifestation. If you think about it, when a person dies, something's gone from that body. It's cold, it's no longer warm. It starts decaying. So the air is gone from it. And it's not that personality any longer. Their mind and intellect doesn't seem to be functioning there. You can't ask it anything, a dead body, as it were. So that's gone from it. It's thoughts, emotions. So the personality, in a sense, has gone, that subtle aspect. But the gross aspect, consisting of all the elements, is still there. And that's going from it. The fire's gone from it. The air has gone from it. So it totally deteriorates to the earth, as it were. So that's apara, lower. The material nature. In verse 5, it's going to talk about para, the higher nature. It's just giving us a manifestation of what's in the world in this. So we have an understanding. So all of it's backed by Brahman, is going to say shortly. So let's read. Let's read the verse.
As an enlightened soul who has merged with the supreme reality, Krishna again uses the pronouns I and my to mean Brahman. Herein, he declares earth, water, fire, air, space, mind, intellect, and ego as his Prakriti, nature. This eightfold division constitutes the lower aspects of Brahman.
So it's all matter, yes? You can't have, matter doesn't become sentient without something, a combination of spirit and matter, then you become sentient. the self alone doesn't have any life. Body, mind, intellect doesn't have any life. The combination of the two, body, mind, and intellect plus spirit, gives life. Yeah, continue.
The 5 rudimentary elements of the eightfold division, namely space, air, fire, water, and earth, are known as Mahabhutas. The Mahabhutas, in their pure and nascent form, combined to mold subtle matter, the material which constitutes the mind, intellect, and ego. These elements, however, subject themselves to grossification through a process of pentamerous self-division and mutual combination called Panchikarna. Panchikarna transforms the subtle into gross elements. The gross elements combine to mold gross matter. The gross and the subtle matter together constitute the lower nature of Brahman.
So this idea is expressed more eloquently eloquently is the wrong word, more elaborately in the Atma Bodha. So anybody wants to have a look at that reference of how things change, how things become from the vasanas, from the first thought, vasanas, from the Brahman, vasanas, mind, intellect, ego, to physical matter. And we can see, relatively speaking, when we see something which is a subtle thought which manifests into a gross action. If you think about it, your actions are always backed by something subtler which you can't see manifest within you, your thought to action. So this is taking it a few steps backwards of how this manifestation has come about. So for your own reference, anybody wants to take a further look, they can look in Atma Bodha. We'll give the reference in the WhatsApp. Continue.
The physical body is made up of gross matter, the mind, manas, and intellect, buddhi, of subtle matter. Physical body houses the 5 organs of perception, jnana, indriyas, and the 5 organs of action, karma, indriyas. The mind consists of passions and emotions, feelings and impulses, likes and dislikes, doubts and indecisions. Whereas the intellect thinks, reasons, discriminates, judges, and decides. A third factor in a human being is the ego, ahankara, which connects impulses of the mind and the decisions of the intellect as one's own. The feeling that both the doubts and decisions are mine. This idea of possessiveness is the ego. These equipments, the body and the mind, intellect, ego, together form the lower aspects of Brahman. The following verse covers its higher aspects.
So, nevertheless, our mind, intellect, ego, the matter layers still also have that element of the Brahman, but that's the lower nature of the Brahman, the manifestation of the world. This next verse, verse 5, is going to talk about the aspect which is para, the higher aspect of Brahman. Let's chant 5. Sorry, Vidya. So all it's saying is how the manifestation is from the Brahman, from the truth, how this world's come into manifestation. That's all it's explaining in that verse. But what's backing it? Both 2 aspects, lower, higher, both backed by the Brahman. 5 explains the higher. Go ahead, Vidya.
Apareyamitastvanyam Prakritim Viddhi Me Para Jiva Bhuta Mahabaho Yahedam Dharyate Jagat.
Renu, if you could read the verse.
This is the lower, but different from it, O Mahabo. Know my higher Prakriti, nature, the life element by which this universe is supported.
So the lower nature is referring to the world. Apara, the higher nature, is referring to the spirit. Para. So spirit and matter. So when you have spirit and matter together, produce what we are in the world now. So just as you have the body, mind, and intellect, and we say there's a self, Atman, you, as it were. So the manifestation of para and apara together. It's like saying in the world, what makes up the world in a sense, we have time, space, causation. If we take away time, space, causation, which time appears as eternal, space like with no boundaries, all pervading, and causation seems as though it offers something infinite. But if we take away those, so it's like a reflection of the Brahman, but if we take away all three of those, there's no world. So they seemingly seem infinite, but there's no world. So what we are experiencing is in actual fact something infinite, seemingly infinite, backed by the Brahman, which is infinite. It's like a reflection of, the world is like a reflection of what an element, an aspect of the Brahman in a sense. The nature of Brahman is manifested in the world. It appears as time, space, causation, as it were. Take that away, you've got that infinite reality. You've got the no reflection, in fact. You've got the Brahman itself. So what's supporting the world is the Brahman. Apara. Let's read it a little.
The lower nature of Brahman comprises of subtle and gross matter, the mind, intellect, and ego forming the subtle and the gross elements, earth, water, fire, air, and space forming the gross matter. The lower nature of Brahman, comprising mere matter, has no life in itself. In this verse, Krishna, as Brahman, expresses his higher nature, the life element, which enlivens matter. Brahman, in the form of spirit, higher, and matter, lower, therefore combines to bring about the expression of life in this universe of living beings.
So essentially, spirit, matter, para, apara, an enlivening principle, which we're calling Brahman, spirit, if you want to say for better, enables the whole lot. We're trying to get to it, recognize it. But when we act in the world, it's like we're acting in the reflection of it. So one has to go within to gain that realization of what it is. So get to that truth. So it's like, I think maybe he's going to give it in the commentary. Let's continue.
Spirit is the supreme self within. The self, functioning through the material equipments, produces living beings. The material equipments, the body and the mind, intellect, ego, are inert and insentient in themselves. But when they come in contact with the self, they become sentient. The self is the sentient principle, the life-giving force or power. It relates to the material equipments like electricity to an electric bulb. A bulb in itself has no light, nor does electricity. But when electricity contacts a bulb, there is a brilliant expression of light. Similarly, the body with the mind, intellect, ego together have no life inherent in them, nor does the self, but when they combine, there is a scintillating expression of life.
So you see, you try and take on board the example. You have electricity, you can't see it, but you know that without electricity, none of the whole gadgets function on the whole. Electricity can give you heat, it can give you cool, it gives you light, it can do all sorts of different things, it gives different expressions. Now, here in the example, the bulb has a filament, but the bulb doesn't switch the bulb on. What makes the bulb go on is the electricity. But the two have got to meet in order for it to happen. Electricity alone is not going to make the bulb happen, go bright. The bulb itself doesn't make it, you have light. When they come together, it gives that expression. Here, when the Brahman comes together with the matter layers, when the self comes together with the matter layers, there's an expression of life. That's what it's saying. Let's read the last paragraph.
Mahabahu refers to Arjuna. The name literally means mighty armed. Krishna subtly suggests to Arjuna to use his mighty arms to conquer the supreme self within, the higher aspect of Brahman.
So we're all Mahabahu, mighty arm. Mighty arm not meaning with your bow and arrows, because he's on a battlefield, remember. He's a warrior prince. But mighty arm, you're in that capacity to resolve your vasanas, your desires, and get to that truth. So get onto it. Get onto the higher aspect of Brahman. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Very well.